A life well lived is one in which we are improving ourselves over time, slowly. Stagnation isn't really a choice. It's the choice to allow our flaws to get worse and worse until they subsume us and become us. As with nearly everything, self-improvement is best done with a systematic approach. Hi, I'm Dominic Zarlengo, doctor and definitely wannabe YouTuber, and we're going to continue our journey through some of the ideas of author, podcaster, and YouTuber Cal Newport. In this video, we're going to talk about a little bit different side of productivity, one in which we're cultivating a deep life. A life in which we have adventure, exploration, and accomplishment. So let's get started talking about that. In order to cultivate a deep life, we're going to need to have synergy between different areas of our life. You can think of these different areas as components of your life or buckets of your life, and each one of us is going to have a little bit different set of these. But as human beings, we're going to have a pretty big overlap between several of them. And there's probably 5 that all of us will have, and where we're going to start and use an example for this video. And those 5 areas are craft, or what you produce in your job or with your unique skills. Community, which is your social network, your relationships, ways that you serve the community around you. Constitution, which is your health and fitness. Contemplation, which is the thoughtful spiritual side of being a human being. And celebration, which is kind of a funny bucket, but it's all about how we celebrate life, how we live with gratitude, how do we enjoy this life around us. So to get started with this overhaul of our life, or thinking in a systematic way about how we can cultivate a deep life, how we can continue to improve, is by starting out by developing what are called keystone habits. And so we're going to want to develop some keystone habits for each of the buckets that we just mentioned. A keystone habit is something that can be done every day or nearly every day, is feasible to do that amount of time, but also is meaningful, and is something that is tractable and trackable that you can check off on a list. And so this honestly is going to take some trial and error, just like everything else that we're talking about. You're not going to be instantly good at this. And so what we want to do is we want to take all of those buckets that we mentioned before, and we want to think about a keystone habit for each of these. What these keystone habits do is that they tell your mind that this is something that's important to me. This bucket or this component of my life is something that I want to spend time on. Now, if you've read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, I think he does a really nice job of talking about identity. And every choice we make is a vote toward the person we want to be. And so what that means, and the way that James Clear explains it, one action doesn't make who you are, but a series of actions does. Just like one vote doesn't decide an election, but all the votes put together does. And so what we want to think about here is the actions we take, the more and more we do them, the more and more of an identity we build up within ourselves. So keystone habits are the route for which we want to do that. And so what you're going to want to do is take several months to a year to really develop these keystone habits within each of your buckets. You're going to initially come up with some habits that 1, are not feasible to do, or 2, maybe too easy, or 3, are not working, on and on from there. The main point is you're not going to get it right away. You might get lucky in 1 or 2 of these buckets and say, no, that was actually a pretty good thing to start with. But most of the time it's going to be some trial and error, and as we've talked about in other videos, you want to use reflection and adjustments to make sure that you're going to come up with a keystone habit that is really something that will overhaul that bucket or that component of a deep life that you're going for. Then, after you have spent a lot of time developing a keystone habit in each of these areas, you have them going, and you really feel like you're making some movement in these areas, now you can go back and one by one overhaul each of those components or each of those buckets. And so what that will look like is a 4 to 6 week period where you are focusing just on that bucket and coming up with some way to improve. I know a lot of this is really open-ended, and I wish I could give you the very specific things to do, but I'm going to be honest with you, I'm in the same boat of struggling through this, but I do really believe in this process. Now, when you do this big overhaul like this is probably a one-time thing where you're going through and overhauling each of these buckets, because from there, you're just going to be adding on top of the foundation you're building. Just like in all the other videos that we've been talking about, all of this is about building a foundation from which you can spring forward and either reach the goals that you have in your life or consistently improve over time, over and over again, and just basically lead yourself to accomplishment, deep life, and a life that you truly enjoy, whatever that means for you as an individual. Additionally, on top of overhauling all of these buckets, we may want to do a little bit of thought process about what our values are. And an easy way or a simple way to do this would just be to list our values. Things like bravery, kindness, patience. You certainly can list all of those things, and you probably want them written somewhere so that you can keep referring to something. It seems a little silly that you would refer to values or the fact that you want to be brave in situations, but the fact of the matter is, when you're in a situation and you have a choice to make, that's when you want to be able to recall what is important to you. And having something that you refer to, that you've written down, that you review, again, is building an identity for yourself that these things are important. So again, you could just list these out, but I actually heard a very interesting thing from Cal Newport, which is in each of these buckets that we talked about before, your craft, celebration, community, those things, in each of those, you're gonna have some roles. So for instance, for me, within the craft bucket is gonna be being a doctor. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna think about each of these buckets, and you're gonna think about the roles that you have within these buckets. And a really interesting way to develop values is then to write a brief summary about what kind of this you want to be. So for instance, for me, I would start with the role, which is being a doctor. So I want to be the type of doctor that, and then we're gonna move into our values. Enthusiastically teaches, thoughtfully thinks through a workup. So all in all, it would look like a little sheet of paper or something on your computer that would say, I want to be the type of doctor that enthusiastically teaches and thoughtfully thinks through his diagnostic workup. And so you can really go through and do that for being a father, for being an engineer, for being a friend. Now you don't have to go overboard with this, but it's a nice place to start because you can actually develop some values that you probably wouldn't think of if you were just listing them one by one. Like, let's be honest, I'm not gonna list one of my values of just being like bravery, patience, thoughtful diagnostic workup. I'm probably not going to do that. But if I think of the roles that I have within each of the buckets of my life, I actually probably am going to pretty naturally come through with some values. And so once you have all those values in place, another nice thing that you can do while you're getting your keystone habits, eventually leading to a bucket overhaul or a life component overhaul, what you can be doing at the same time is with every weekly review, weekly planning session, you can come up with what Cal Newport considered or called a value plan. And so what that means is you can look at one of these values that you have listed and you can just focus or home in on areas, or I should say values, that you don't think you're quite living up to. And so again, as you're just like when you're focusing on each bucket at a time or one keystone habit at a time, you want to week just focus on one value at a time. All of this is about just breaking things down into small enough pieces that you can actually improve. So you can take these plans, you can focus on them during the week, you may want to refer to them each morning. This all takes effort, but we're not really going to get better by putting no effort in, right? None of us are going to expect to just build big muscles without going to the gym. You have to put the reps in. And so it's the same way with your value system or with your habits or with the big areas of your life. You're going to have to put the effort in to improve. And what you want to do is improve over time, and you want to do it slowly. If you notice, all of these are supposed to be done on a slow pace. You're not just going to become your dream person overnight. And in fact, a slow process allows you to just keep adapting and evolving. 1 year of your life may have a whole bunch of values that are important to you, where 2 or 3 years later, none of those might matter. This is all fine. It's the same thing with all of the planning sessions that we talked about, the multi-scale planning. It's not about telling the future. It's not about making a decision for the rest of your life. It's about doing something in the here and now that you can act upon, that you can reflect on, and that you can adapt to fit your life or to improve the habit that you're doing or whatever. So this approach to cultivating a deep life is honestly not that complex. It's going to involve, one, identifying some areas of your life. We're going to develop keystone habits, which are things that are meaningful but can be done, that are feasible to do on a nearly daily basis. And we're going to just get those keystone habits locked in over months to a year. Once we go ahead and get those keystone habits locked in, we can then move into a one-time bucket overhaul where we're just going to start at the top of those buckets, focus on one at a time, and make some decisions over a 4 to 6 week period about how we can work on improvement. Again, still using reflection on what's working, adaptation to what is not working, or a change of course to get closer to our goals if those change over time. So keystone habits, moving on to a bucket overhaul. Both of those are going to get you a really nice foundation to build off of going forward. And then once you get there, that's when you can go ahead and implement some of these multi-scale planning, of which I have a video on that you can take a look at, but basically at a very high level involves planning on a quarterly basis, on a weekly basis, and then time block planning on a daily basis. Once you have these keystone habits, moving into a bucket overhaul, you can move on to that multi-scale planning. That's going to be a lot more fruitful way to do that. And additionally, alongside all of this, we can think about developing some values. We can do that either by just listing values, but an interesting approach might be to think about what your roles are in each of your buckets that we defined earlier, and then to just write what kind of person or what kind of doctor or what kind of mother or father you want to be. And that's going to identify a role, and that's going to identify some values within there. You can then, with your weekly planning, or even before you get to that, you can just each week think about what's a value I'm struggling with, or what's important to me that I want to improve on, and you can really think about that value, thinking about it every morning, consciously making decisions throughout your day that align with that value. The more you do this, then after you put some consistent concentration, effort, and focus into it, then it becomes like second nature. Then you become the person that lives by the value. That's how you go ahead and do this, is you're going to want to put in some energy up front so that later on it's going to take a whole lot less energy because it's just who you are. Finally, as we continue to think about all of these as foundations, the thing that you can do is that once you have all of this in place, you're at a really interesting vantage point for your life. And so from there, you can take a look around at what your lifestyle is like. Cal Newport talks about doing some lifestyle planning, which is thinking more broadly than what is my passion, or what's just the one job I want, or maybe I'm going to jump from job to job. It's much better to think about what do you want your life just to look like, and then fit the pieces in place for that. And so once you have all of this in place, and you can look around from that vantage point, you can then see how close or far off you are from the type of lifestyle that you want. And if you're farther off or you want to make a change, because you've built this strong foundation, you can now actually make a radical change. You can move to a different city, you can change jobs, you can build a writer's shed on your property. But the reason you can do this is because you actually have taken a very thorough, effortful, and thoughtful approach to get to the point where when you make a decision, it's actually based on all that prior stuff that we built, and it's not just a hasty decision because I hate my job and I'm just going to change it. No, it's much different than that. You have built up some value within your life. You have cultivated a life that's deep and meaningful to you. And so now when you look around and make decisions, you're going to have that in the background to make a decision on. And somewhere, again, that you can springboard off from or build from, or think of all these things that you're building as a support network for you to do these interesting and radical things in your life. And then you could do that every single year. And so again, where you start is small and minuscule, and these little changes and these keystone habits that you're trying to figure out. If you do that, there's going to be some point that you look back and think, wow, all of that led to this amazing spot that I'm in now. Additionally, doing this slowly over time means that you're not making one big decision and then being like, damn, this isn't right. I made all these huge changes. Instead, you're really changing over time so that you're making small adjustments in the moment, which again look large over time. But because you're making small adjustments over time, you're not going to overshoot in some direction that is totally wrong for you. And then hopefully you end up exactly where you want to be, and then just continue this process and change over time. So there you have it, another video focusing on Cal Newport, this time looking at a little bit different perspective about cultivating a deep life. And so I hope this is helpful, and I'm still working on them, but I just wanted to summarize some of the things that I've learned to hopefully help other people and help myself as well. And so if you like these videos, again, please let me know, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel. I'm hoping to continue and explore a wide variety of topics and to get a little more complex as time goes on. And so if there's something you like about this, let me know. If you dislike this, let me know. If you have constructive feedback, let me know. Topics you want, let me know. But thanks again for watching. Thanks for visiting the channel. If you've watched any other videos, I thank you deeply. And I hope that you'll continue to come back, and I hope that we can kind of explore different things together. And I just really wanted to thank you, and I hope you come back, and I appreciate it. Thanks so much.